My daughter put me in a nursing home without my permission, and her husband smiled. They decided to get rid of me so they could take my house and car, thinking I was a helpless old man. But I had a shocking surprise in store for them. Wait for the consequences. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Dad, Mike and I have been thinking, it's time for you to move somewhere special where professionals can take care of you. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sarah sat at my kitchen table, her hands folded around gift bags she'd brought for Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on me. Steam still rose from the pot roast I'd spent 3 hours preparing, filling my home with the smell of garlic and rosemary, my daughter's favorite meal since she was 7 years old. What? I gripped the back of my chair, knuckles going white. What fool came up with this idea? I'm still full of strength. Mike stepped forward from where he'd been lurking near the doorway, 49 years old and already looking like he'd given up on life, with his receding hairline and the perpetual scowl that seemed permanently etched into his face. John, you're not who you used to be. This will be better for everyone. Better for whom? For you to take over my house? Sarah's face crumpled, but I caught the flash of something else in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? She'd practiced this conversation. How can you say that? We care about you. Care about me? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. If you cared about me, you wouldn't be sitting in my kitchen talking about shipping me off to some institution. I gestured toward the dining room, where family photos lined the mantelpiece. 40 years I worked 3 jobs to give you an education, Sarah. 40 years of 16-hour days so you could have everything you wanted. Mike moved closer, positioning himself between me and the front door. The movement was subtle, but I'd learned to read body language in Vietnam. This wasn't a discussion, this was a trap. The paperwork is already filed, he said, pulling a manila folder from his jacket. We found a really nice place, Sunset Haven. They have activities, medical care on site, everything you need. I don't need anything except to be left alone in my own house. My voice echoed off the kitchen walls. The same walls I'd painted every 5 years for the past 3 decades. The same kitchen where I'd taught Sarah to scramble eggs when she was 8, where we'd celebrated every birthday, every achievement. Sarah stood up, her chair scraping against the linoleum. Dad, please. You fell last month. What if something happens and no one finds you for days? I didn't fall. I slipped on ice you would have seen if you visited more than once every 2 months. The accusation hung in the air between us. And since when do you care what happens to me? You haven't called in 3 weeks. That's not fair. But her voice wavered. Mike stepped closer again. I could smell his cologne, something expensive and cloying. Look, old man, this is happening whether you like it or not. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Are you threatening me in my own home? I'm being realistic. You can come with us tomorrow morning, or we can have the county make the decision for you. Choice is yours. The gift bags on the table seemed to mock me. Pretty pink tissue paper, ribbons tied in perfect bows, props in a performance I hadn't known I was watching. My 70-year-old heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind was clear, clearer than it had been in months. Get out, I pointed toward the door. Both of you, get out of my house. Sarah's face went pale. Dad, we're not leaving without... I said get out. The pot roast continued steaming on the counter, forgotten. Valentine's Day dinner for 3 that would never be eaten. Mike smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd seen since the jungle. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 9. Have a bag packed, or we'll pack it for you. The front door slammed behind them, leaving me alone with the silence and the smell of a meal that had turned to ash in my mouth. Through the window, I watched Mike's BMW pull out of my driveway, carrying my daughter away from me. I stood there for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. The same house where Sarah had taken her first steps, where she'd brought her prom date to meet me, where she'd cried when her marriage fell apart. Now it felt like a tomb. The phone rang. Sarah's ringtone. I let it ring. At 9 sharp, the moving truck pulled into my driveway. I'd spent the night barricaded in my bedroom, every light in the house blazing, a baseball bat across my knees. Sleep hadn't come. Instead, I'd stared at the ceiling, remembering the day I'd bought this house. Sarah was 12 then, and she'd picked out the paint color for her room. Sunshine yellow, she'd called it. Heavy footsteps on my front porch. The doorbell, then pounding. "Dad, open up!" Sarah's voice, higher pitched than usual. "We know you're in there." I stayed put. Let them break down the door if they wanted in so badly. The key turned in the lock. My spare key, the one I'd given Sarah for emergencies. This qualified, I supposed, just not the kind I'd imagined. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my house." Mike appeared in my bedroom doorway, two large men behind him, movers from the look of their matching uniforms, professional muscle. "Don't make this difficult, old man. Your stuff is already packed." "Packed?" I struggled to my feet, my cane sliding across the hardwood. "You haven't packed anything. You just got here." Sarah pushed past Mike, her eyes red from crying. Real tears or manufactured ones, I couldn't tell anymore. "Dad, this is temporary, until we get your affairs in order." "What affairs? Everything is fine with my affairs." I jabbed my cane toward the dresser where my important papers sat in perfect order. Birth certificate, marriage license, Dorothy's death certificate, my will, all exactly where they'd been for 15 years. One of the movers was already in my closet, pulling shirts off hangers. My navy dress uniform, the suit I'd worn to Dorothy's funeral, the Christmas sweater Sarah had given me last year. Everything treated like inventory in a warehouse. "Stop touching my things!" I swung my cane, but Mike caught it easily. "Bob, Jim, get his stuff loaded. We're on a schedule." The efficiency was terrifying. These men had done this before. They moved through my house like a SWAT team, boxing up 40 years of memories in less than an hour. My tools went into unmarked boxes. The photo of Dorothy and me on our wedding day disappeared into bubble wrap. The Purple Heart I'd never talked about, not even to Sarah, vanished into a cardboard container, labeled MISC. "Where are you taking everything?" "Storage unit," Mike said, not looking up from his clipboard, "until we figure out what to keep." Until they figured out what had value, he meant, what could be sold. The car ride was a nightmare of suburban streets I'd driven for decades, now seen through the window of Mike's BMW like a tourist in my own life. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at me with what might have been regret. Mike drove in silence, NPR playing softly on the radio. At a red light, I tried the door handle. Locked. "Child safety locks," Mike said, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. Amazing what they think of these days. Sunset Haven looked exactly like what it was. A warehouse for the unwanted elderly. Red brick facade, manicured lawn, and a sign advertising compassionate care for your loved ones. The parking lot was full of sedans driven by middle-aged children, making the same choice Sarah had made. Eric Palmer met us at the front desk with a smile that never reached his eyes. 30-something, perfectly pressed polo shirt, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Connor, we've been expecting you. I'm Eric, and I'll be helping you get settled today." "I don't want to get settled. I want to go home." "I understand this is a big transition, but you're going to love it here. We have bingo on Wednesdays, movie nights on Fridays, and the best medical staff in the county." Sarah finally looked at me directly. "Dad, we'll visit. This isn't goodbye." But we both knew it was. Room 247 had beige walls, a narrow bed, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot, where Mike's BMW had disappeared an hour ago. My belongings looked foreign here, like artifacts from someone else's life. The photo of Dorothy in her nurse's uniform sat on the plastic nightstand, smiling at a room she'd never seen. My toolbox, the one I'd carried to 3 different jobs for 30 years, sat uselessly in the corner next to a walker I didn't need. "Mr. Connor, dinner is at 6 p.m. in the dining hall. The rules here are simple." Eric Palmer stood in my doorway, still wearing that practice smile. "Medication distribution is at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Visiting hours end at 9. Any questions?" "When can I leave?" "Well, that would be up to your family and our medical staff to determine." He checked his watch. "I'll let you get settled. Welcome to Sunset Haven." The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone with the institutional smell of disinfectant and the distant sound of television game shows echoing from the common areas. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the photo of Dorothy. She'd been 43 when it was taken, just 4 years younger than Sarah was now. Beautiful, proud, wearing the uniform she'd worked so hard to earn. We'd been married 22 years when the cancer took her, And not once in all that time had she looked at me the way Sarah had looked at me today, with calculation, with inconvenience, with the cold assessment of someone deciding whether something was worth keeping. 40 years I worked 3 jobs to give her an education. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Sarah, at 18, accepted to Northwestern but worried about the cost. Me, working days at the auto shop, evenings at the hardware store, weekends doing handyman jobs for neighbors, sleeping 4 hours a night for 2 years so she could have her dream. I'd sold my motorcycle, the 1967 Harley I'd bought with my first paycheck, home from Vietnam, sold my father's watch, the one he'd carried through World War II, sold everything that mattered to me so Sarah could matter to herself. And now she throws me away like garbage. The walls of room 247 pressed in around me. 70 years old, but my hands were still steady, my mind still sharp. I'd survived the Tet Offensive, raised a daughter alone after Dorothy died, built a business from nothing and sold it for enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. They thought I was just another confused old man to be managed and medicated. They were wrong. From somewhere down the hall came the sound of voices, other residents gathering for dinner, stories being shared, complaints about children who visited less and less frequently. But I wasn't listening to the words. I was listening to the tone. Resignation, acceptance, defeat. I stood up and walked to the window. In the parking lot below, a new car was pulling in. Another family, another conversation about what was best for everyone involved. The cycle continuing. But not for me. I wasn't like the others shuffling through these halls in their slippers and hospital gowns. I was John Connor, and I'd been underestimated before. It hadn't ended well for the people who'd made that mistake. The voices from the dining hall grew louder. Maybe it was time to listen to more than just the tone. Sunday morning found me walking toward the common room, my cane tapping against the polished linoleum with each deliberate step. 2 days in this place had taught me the rhythms. Most residents shuffled around in fuzzy slippers, staring at soap operas with vacant expressions. But near the windows, I'd noticed something different. 3 people sat together each morning, talking in low voices while others dozed in wheelchairs. Unlike the rest, their eyes held fire. "You look like someone who doesn't belong here either." The woman who spoke had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes sharp as broken glass. Mary Johnson, according to the nameplate on her door. Former English teacher, if the way she held herself was any indication. "Depends on what you mean by belong." I settled into the 4th chair, noting how the group had unconsciously arranged themselves, facing away from the staff station. "I mean," said the man with grease still embedded under his fingernails, despite being here God knows how long. "None of us are senile, none of us are dying, and none of us signed up for this circus voluntarily." Frank O'Connor. Had to be. The way he sized up problems reminded me of engineers I'd known in the service. The 3rd man studied me with the measured gaze of someone who'd spent decades reading people for a living. Robert Wilson wore institutional pajamas, like the rest of us, but somehow managed to look distinguished anyway. "My son took my house, promising he'd take care of me. Now he never calls." Mary's voice carried the particular bitterness of maternal love betrayed. "Sold it for half its value to some developer friend of his. I didn't find out until I was already here." Frank snorted. "At least your kid waited until you were gone. My daughter sold my garage for pennies as soon as I signed the power of attorney. 40 years building that business. Gone in a week." "Power of attorney abuse," Robert said quietly. "Classic financial elder exploitation. The law is on our side, if we can prove the deception." Their stories hit too close to home. Sarah's face in my kitchen, practiced and cold. Mike's threats. The moving truck waiting like a hearse. "My daughter and her husband convinced me this was temporary," I heard myself saying. "Said they needed to get my affairs in order. 40 years I worked 3 jobs to pay for her education, and this is how she says thank you." Mary reached over and patted my hand. Her fingers were bird-thin, but surprisingly strong. "How long have you been here?" 2 days. "You?" 3 weeks. She pulled out a package of cookies from her sweater pocket. Care package from my neighbor. The only person who still remembers I exist. Frank accepted a cookie with a grunt. 2 months for me. Robert's been here longest. 6 weeks. Robert's lawyer mind was clearly working. long enough to understand the patterns. The staff here, particularly Eric Palmer, facilitates these family betrayals. For a fee, of course. What kind of fee? I kept my voice casual, but my pulse quickened. Hard to prove without documentation, but I've observed enough phone calls, enough paperwork irregularities. This place profits from keeping families separated while assets get liquidated. Mary leaned forward. Robert thinks we might have legal recourse if we can document the fraud. More than might, Robert said firmly. I've been taking notes, tracking patterns. We're not just victims here. We're witnesses to systematic elder abuse. Frank's eyes lit up with something I recognized from my Navy days, the look of a man who'd found his mission. So what do we do about it? We gather evidence, Robert said. Document everything. Build a case they can't dismiss as the confused ramblings of elderly people. And then? Then we fight back. The words hung in the air between us. Around the room, other residents dozed or stared blankly at television screens, but our little circle buzzed with purpose. I'm in, I said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. Mary smiled, and for the first time since arriving, I felt something other than despair. Good, because we're going to need all the help we can get. Frank cracked his knuckles. About time someone stood up to these vultures. Robert nodded approvingly. I'll start drafting our documentation strategy. John, would you mind keeping your ears open around the facility? Fresh eyes see things the rest of us might have missed. I can do that. As we dispersed for lunch, I felt lighter than I had in days. They thought they'd isolated me, made me helpless. Instead, they'd given me exactly what I needed. Allies with nothing left to lose. Tuesday night, 9:30 p.m. The hallways of Sunset Haven took on a different character after lights out. Shadows stretched longer, and the institutional cheerfulness faded into something more honest, more sinister. I'd been lying awake for hours, my mind replaying fragments of overheard conversations. Eric Palmer's interactions with new families followed a pattern Robert had identified. Too helpful, too knowledgeable about legal loopholes, too eager to expedite paperwork. Thirst gave me the excuse I needed to explore. My cane tapped softly against the linoleum as I made my way toward the kitchen. The night staff barely glanced up from their station, just another old man shuffling around, harmless and forgettable. That's when I heard Eric's voice, low, confident, coming from around the corner near the administration office. I froze, pressing myself against the wall. Yes, Sarah, the documents are ready. Your father is officially incapacitated. My blood turned to ice. Sarah's voice came through the phone, tinny but audible. Perfect. When can we start selling the house? Give me a week. For an extra $5,000, I'll expedite the process. My hand found my phone in my pocket, muscle memory from the few times Sarah had taught me to use the voice memo function. I pressed record. The medical evaluation was easy to fabricate. Dr. Martinez never actually examined him, just signed the forms I prepared. Your father's been declared mentally incompetent, which gives you full power of attorney. What about the neighbors? They know he's fine. Doesn't matter. Once the legal paperwork is filed, their opinions are irrelevant. The house can be sold within 2 weeks. And you're sure this is airtight? Eric's laugh made my skin crawl. I've done this 47 times, Sarah. Never had a challenge stick. Old people don't fight back, and their friends are usually dead or in facilities themselves. Mike's going to be so relieved. We owe more than the house is worth, but this should cover everything and give us a fresh start. Just remember our agreement. 15% of the sale price plus the expedite fee. Of course, you've been worth every penny. The call ended. I stood frozen in the shadows, my phone still recording the silence that followed. 47 times. They'd done this to 47 families. Eric's footsteps moved away toward the staff station. I waited another minute before retreating to my room, my mind reeling. Back in room 247, I sat on my bed and replayed the recording. Clear as day. Sarah's voice acknowledging the fraud. Eric admitting to document falsification. A doctor's signature obtained without examination. 40 years I'd worked to give Sarah everything she wanted, and this was how she repaid me. Not just betrayal, but criminal conspiracy. My hands shook, but not from age or fear, from fury. They thought John Connor was helpless, an inconvenient old man to be managed and discarded. Time to show them exactly how wrong they were. The recording would change everything. Robert would know what to do with it, how to turn their confidence into their downfall. Sarah had always been too smart for her own good, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated her old man. Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, I knocked on Robert's door with the urgency of a man carrying dynamite. "John, what's wrong?" "Close the door. Get Mary and Frank, now." Robert's lawyer instincts kicked in immediately. Within 5 minutes, our little conspiracy was assembled in his room, voices lowered, door firmly closed. "I've got them." I held up my phone. "Everything. Sarah, Eric, the whole operation." Mary gasped. Frank leaned forward. Robert's eyes sharpened with professional interest. "Play it," he said simply. The recording filled the small room. Sarah's voice cold and calculating. Eric's casual admission of fraud. The number that made us all flinch. 47 victims. When it finished, silence stretched between us like a held breath. "Sweet mother of pearl," Frank whispered. "They're running a whole operation." Mary's face had gone pale. "That poor doctor. They're using his signature without his knowledge." Robert was already thinking 3 steps ahead. "John, this is substantial evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. How clear is the audio quality?" "Clear enough. I was maybe 10 feet away." "Good. This recording, combined with documentation of the pattern across multiple residents, gives us grounds for both criminal charges and civil action." Robert began pacing the small space. "Can you check if my property still legally belongs to me?" "Of course. As long as you're alive and haven't signed transfer papers, everything is still yours. The power of attorney documents Eric fabricated have no legal standing." Frank's hands clenched into fists. "So they're trying to steal what doesn't belong to them?" "Exactly. And now we have proof." Robert turned to Mary. "We can't let them do this to you." "Or to anyone else?" she added firmly. 47 families, Robert. How many more are they planning?" "Not one more if I can help it." Robert's professional demeanor had taken over completely. "Here's what we need to do. John, you've provided the smoking gun, but we need supporting documentation, medical records, financial papers, anything that shows the pattern." "What about the other residents?" I asked. "Some of them might be part of this same scheme." "Carefully approach the ones who seem alert, but maintain operational security. If Eric suspects we're onto him, he'll destroy evidence and accelerate the timeline." Frank cracked his knuckles. "What about going to the police?" "We will, but we need enough evidence that they can't dismiss us as confused elderly people. The recording is crucial, but corroborating evidence will make the case bulletproof." Mary pulled out a small notebook. "I've been keeping track of which families visit and which don't. The pattern is disturbing." "Perfect. Document everything." Robert sat on his bed, suddenly looking every inch the lawyer he'd been for 50 years. "John, can you continue monitoring Eric's activities? Mary, keep tracking family patterns. Frank, see if you can identify any maintenance issues that might help us access restricted areas." "What's our timeline?" I asked. They gave themselves a week before starting the house sale. "That means we have maybe 5 days to build an airtight case." Robert's expression was grim but determined. "But if we do this right, we don't just save your house, John. We save everyone." "And make them pay for what they've done," Frank added with satisfaction. "Justice," Mary said quietly, "for all of us." I looked around at these 3 people who'd started it as strangers and become my closest allies. "So we're really doing this." "We're really doing this," Robert confirmed. "They picked the wrong old folks to mess with." As we prepared to disperse and begin our intelligence gathering, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Dorothy died. Purpose, direction, the satisfaction of having a mission worth fighting for. Sarah thought she was so clever, planning my destruction from the shadows. Time to drag everything into the light. Friday afternoon, 3 p.m. Robert and I sat in the back of a taxi heading downtown, officially on our way to my cardiologist appointment. The driver hummed along to the radio while I gripped the manila envelope in my lap, containing documents that would change everything. "Nervous?" Robert asked quietly. "Excited," I corrected. "It's been months since I've had a real ace up my sleeve." The law office of Thomas Green occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower that scraped a Chicago sky. Professional, discreet, Exactly what I'd needed back in August, when Sarah's behavior first started raising red flags. "Mr. Connor," Thomas stood as we entered his oak-paneled office. "Right on time. And you must be Robert Wilson." "The colleague I mentioned," I confirmed. "Robert's been helping me understand the legal implications." Thomas retrieved a thick envelope from his safe, breaking the seal with practiced efficiency. "Your will from August last year is completely valid. Every page properly witnessed and notarized." Robert leaned forward, professional curiosity evident. "May I examine the documentation?" "Of course." Thomas spread the papers across his mahogany desk. "As you can see, Mr. Connor has left his entire estate to the Veterans Administration Medical Center. No family inheritance whatsoever." "Excellent. So my daughter won't get anything?" The satisfaction in my voice was unmistakable. Robert's eyebrows shot up. "John, you never mentioned—" "I had my suspicions about Mike even then," I explained. "The way he looked at my house, asked questions about property values. So I took precautions." Thomas nodded approvingly. "Very wise. The will specifically excludes Sarah Connor Thornton from any inheritance, citing irreconcilable differences and financial irresponsibility. But we must wait until they commit illegal acts," Robert said slowly, his lawyer mind processing the implications. "If you reveal this too early, they might abandon the fraud." "Exactly my thinking." I studied the legal documents spread before us. "Let them dig their own grave first." "The beauty is," Thomas added, "once they falsify documents claiming mental incompetence, the will becomes even more powerful evidence of your sound mind and deliberate intent." Robert was already strategizing. "Combined with the recorded evidence, this creates an airtight case. They're not just committing fraud. They're doing it for property they'll never legally inherit." "How long do we wait?" I asked. "Until they've committed to the sale," Robert advised. "Let them sign contracts, accept deposits, maybe even schedule closing. Then we spring the trap." Thomas secured the documents back in his safe. "I'll keep everything ready for immediate filing when you give the word." The taxi ride back to Sunset Haven felt different, lighter somehow. Robert stared out the window, clearly amazed by the day's revelations. "You've been planning this for months," he said finally. "Since the first time Mike suggested I needed professional care." Something in his eyes told me he wasn't thinking about my welfare. "And Sarah," my jaw tightened. "Sarah made her choice when she chose him over me." Back at the facility, we maintained our cover story perfectly. Eric Palmer even asked about my test results with feigned concern. "Everything looks good," I told him with a straight face. "Doctor says I'm in better shape than men half my age." "That's wonderful news, Mr. Connor." If only he knew how wonderful it truly was. Later that evening, as Robert and I sat in the common room, I felt the weight of 40 years lifting from my shoulders. Sarah thought she was so smart, manipulating a helpless old man. Tomorrow we'd discover just how wrong she was. Monday afternoon found Frank hunched over the facility's computer during the designated recreation hour, his engineer's methodical mind working through real estate websites with surgical precision. "John, you need to see this." His voice carried barely contained excitement. I approached casually, aware that other residents occasionally glanced our way. Just two old men looking at pictures on the internet. "What did you find?" Frank's calloused finger pointed at the screen. "Your house is already listed for sale at $380,000. The Zillow listing stared back at me in full color. My front porch, the garden Dorothy had planted, the driveway where I'd taught Sarah to parallel park. All reduced to marketing copy and square footage. They work fast, the scoundrels. "Look at this part." Frank scrolled down to the seller information. "Says the property is being sold by Sarah Connor Thornton due to family relocation." My hands clenched involuntarily. Family relocation, as if I'd willingly agreed to abandon everything I'd built. Robert appeared at my shoulder, drawn by our hushed conversation. "This is exactly what we need. Evidence of crime." "Frank, can you print this?" "Already on it." The printer whirred to life, producing hard copies of the listing, photos, and contact information. "Real estate agent is Jennifer Walsh from Midwest Properties. Posted 3 days ago." Robert studied the documentation with professional interest. "Perfect timing. This proves they're actively marketing stolen property, while you're still legally competent and residing elsewhere under duress." "What about the price?" I asked. Frank pulled up comparable sales. Market value should be closer to 420. They're pricing it to move fast. Desperate people make desperate choices, Robert observed, and desperate choices create evidence. Mary joined our little huddle, ostensibly interested in whatever we were viewing. Any word on when they plan to close? According to this, Frank scrolled through the listing details, they're accepting offers immediately. Says motivated seller, quick closing preferred. Motivated by debt, I muttered. Robert, how does this affect our timeline? We need to act before they accept an offer. Once money changes hands, even fraudulent money, the legal situation becomes more complicated. Frank saved screenshots methodically, his engineering background showing in the organized file structure he created. I'm documenting everything, timestamps, listing agent, price history, photo metadata. Good man, I clapped him on the shoulder. What else can you find about the agent? Jennifer Walsh has been in business for 12 years, mostly suburban residential. Clean record, good reviews. Frank paused. Probably has no idea she's marketing stolen property. She will soon enough, Robert said grimly. As Frank continued his digital investigation, I felt a familiar sensation from my Navy days. The moment when reconnaissance confirmed enemy positions, when all the intelligence gathering crystallized into actionable intelligence. Sarah and Mike thought they were operating in darkness, their fraud invisible to their elderly victim. Time to turn on the lights. Frank, see if you can find any documentation about showings or open houses. Already looking. According to the agent's calendar, first showing is scheduled for Thursday. This Thursday? Robert's eyebrows shot up. 3 days from now. Looks like they're really pushing for a quick sale. Perfect. That gave us exactly the timeline we needed to spring our trap. I studied the listing one more time, memorizing every detail of how they'd packaged my life for sale. The house where I'd raised Sarah, where Dorothy and I had dreamed of growing old together, reduced to bullet points about updated kitchen appliances and proximity to shopping. But they'd made one crucial error in their eagerness to profit from my misery. They'd given us everything we needed to destroy them. Thursday afternoon, the common room buzzed with its usual collection of dozing residents and muted television programs, when Sarah and Mike walked in carrying a briefcase that might as well have been labeled Final Betrayal. I activated my phone's recording app before they reached my chair, the muscle memory feeling more natural each time. Dad! Sarah's voice carried that particular false brightness she'd perfected over the years. You look so much better. The staff here is really taking good care of you. Hello, Sarah. I let my voice sound tired, defeated, the performance of a man who'd accepted his fate. Mike cut straight to business, pulling papers from his briefcase with efficiency that bordered on eagerness. John, just sign here. We're selling the house and buying you a better room. A better room? Private bathroom, bigger window, maybe even cable television. Sarah's lies flowed effortlessly. But we need to finalize the sale first. Dad, we need the money now. Mike has important business deals. Perfect. I leaned forward as if struggling to read the documents. What happens to the money from the sale? Don't worry about that. We'll take care of everything. Mike's impatience bled through his attempt at reassurance. But where will I live when I get better? Sarah and Mike exchanged a glance that told me everything about their long-term plans for my welfare. Dad, you're not getting better. The doctors here have explained your condition. This is your home now. Forever? We've talked to Eric Palmer. He says you're very happy here, making friends, participating in activities. Each lie felt like a physical blow, but I maintained my defeated posture while my phone captured every word. I suppose, if you think it's best. I reached for the pen with trembling fingers that weren't entirely theatrical. How much money will the house bring? Mike's eyes lit up. $380. Good price for a quick sale. And that money goes into a special account for your care, Sarah said smoothly. Though honestly, Dad, with your medical expenses and the cost of this place, it won't last forever. What medical expenses? I feel fine. The doctors say you have early dementia. You just don't remember being sick. I let my face crumple with confusion and fear. I don't remember being sick? That's part of the disease, Dad. But we're handling everything. You just need to sign here, and we'll take care of the rest. Mike has so many opportunities right now. Sarah continued. Real estate investments that could really help secure your future. What kind of investments? Mike leaned back, confidence radiating from every pore. Commercial properties, Dad. Buildings that generate rental income. Your house money becomes seed capital for deals that'll pay your medical bills for years. But what if I get better? You won't. The coldness in Sarah's voice would have frozen a younger man. The doctors have been very clear about your prognosis. I held the pen above the signature line, letting them think victory was within reach. I just want to understand. Once I sign this, what happens to my house? New family moves in, probably fixes it up nice, Mike said dismissively. Honestly, John, the place needed work anyway. This way you don't have to worry about maintenance, property taxes, any of that stuff. And I'll have a nice room here? The nicest room money can buy, Sarah promised. And you'll visit me? Silence stretched between us. Finally, Sarah managed, Of course, Dad, when we can. I set the pen down and looked at my daughter, really looked at her. 40 years of sacrifice, love, and hope stared back at me through eyes that had turned calculating and cold. I need a minute to think about this. Dad, there's nothing to think about. Just sign the papers. It's a lot to process, my whole life. Mike's patience finally snapped. Look, old man, this is happening whether you like it or not. We can do it the easy way or the hard way. Sarah shot him a warning look, but damage was done. The mask had slipped, and my phone had captured every threatening word. Let me just read through this one more time, I said, maintaining my confused act while buying precious seconds for evidence. They waited, predators circling wounded prey, unaware that the prey had teeth of his own and was about to use them. Friday morning, 10 a.m. The Cook County Courthouse rose before us, like a granite monument to justice, its columns stretching toward a Chicago sky that seemed clearer than it had in weeks. Robert adjusted his tie, the first real tie he'd worn since being imprisoned at Sunset Haven. Ready for this, John? I've been ready since August. I patted the briefcase containing 2 weeks' worth of evidence. Phone recordings, fraudulent real estate listings, falsified medical documents, and one devastating surprise that would shatter my daughter's world. The courthouse security line moved slowly. Metal detectors, ID checks, the bureaucratic rhythm of law enforcement, but every step felt like walking toward vindication. Next case, Connor versus Connor, the clerk announced when we reached the filing window. Robert spread our documentation across the counter with practiced efficiency. Your Honor, we have evidence of fraud and conspiracy. Judge Margaret Davis examined the initial papers, her reading glasses perched on her nose like a judicial crown. These are serious allegations, Mr. Wilson. Yes, and we're prepared to prove them. The judge's eyes moved methodically through our evidence summary. Phone recordings between facility staff and family members discussing document falsification. Real estate listings for property owned by plaintiffs still residing elsewhere. Medical declarations signed without examination. Emergency hearing granted, she announced finally. Given the ongoing nature of property theft, I'm scheduling this for Thursday, March 6th. All parties will be notified. Thank you, Your Honor. As we walked from the courthouse, Robert's professional satisfaction was evident. John, in 50 years of practice, I've rarely seen evidence this comprehensive. 47 families, Robert. 47. Not anymore. The taxi ride back to Sunset Haven felt different. No longer were we returning to prison, but to a temporary base of operations. Eric Palmer greeted us at the front desk with his usual false concern. Mr. Connor, how was your doctor's appointment? Excellent news, I replied truthfully. Everything's exactly as it should be. Wonderful to hear. If only he knew how wonderful it truly was. That evening our little group gathered in the common room for what we all knew would be our final strategy session. Mary had brought cookies from her care package. Frank had printed additional documentation from his internet research. Robert organized everything with legal precision. Thursday morning, Robert began, Sarah and Mike will discover they've been playing chess with a grandmaster. What about Eric? Mary asked. Eric will cooperate, I said with certainty. When he realizes he's facing felony charges, he'll tell us everything about their operation. Frank cracked his knuckles with satisfaction. About time these vultures faced consequences. And the will? Robert asked quietly. I smiled, thinking of Sarah's expression when she learned about her complete disinheritance. The will is our ace in the hole. Let them commit to fraud first, then reveal that every crime was committed for property they'll never inherit. Poetic justice, Mary observed. Dorothy would have appreciated the irony, I agreed. Sarah always was too clever for her own good. Thursday changes everything, Robert confirmed. For everyone. As we dispersed to our rooms, I felt the weight of 2 weeks lifting from my shoulders. Tomorrow, we'd face my daughter in court. She'd arrive expecting to defend a minor family disagreement. Instead, she'd discover she'd been outmaneuvered by the old man she'd so thoroughly underestimated. The game was almost over, and I was about to win. Thursday morning, 9 a.m. Courtroom 4B buzzed with the energy of justice about to be served. Sarah and Mike sat at the defendant's table, their lawyer whispering reassurances that would prove meaningless within the hour. Judge Davis called the session to order, with the gravity befitting a case involving systematic elder abuse. Robert stood for his opening statement, every inch the professional attorney despite 2 months in nursing home pajamas. Your Honor, here's the recording between Ms. Connor and the bribed employee. My phone speaker filled the courtroom with Sarah's voice. Perfect. When can we start selling the house? Eric Palmer's response echoed off the walls. Give me a week. For an extra $5,000, I'll expedite the process. Sarah's face went white. Mike grabbed her arm, whispering frantically. The medical evaluation was easy to fabricate. Eric's recorded voice continued. Dr. Martinez never actually examined him, just signed the forms I prepared. Your Honor, Robert continued methodically, we have documented evidence of conspiracy to defraud an elderly person of his property through falsified medical documents and bribery. Sarah's lawyer stood quickly. Objection, Your Honor. This recording was obtained without consent. Overruled. Illinois is a one-party consent state for recordings. The next hour unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of justice. Frank testified about discovering the fraudulent real estate listing. Mary presented her documentation of suspicious family behavior patterns. Robert introduced medical records showing I'd never been examined by Dr. Martinez. Then came Eric Palmer's testimony. Yes, I falsified documents for $5,000, he admitted under oath, his voice barely audible. Ms. Connor contacted me in January about expediting her father's mental incompetence declaration. This isn't true. We just wanted to help. Sarah's voice cracked with desperation. Help yourselves to my property, I replied calmly. Judge Davis maintained professional control as the evidence mounted. Recorded phone conversations detailing criminal conspiracy, fraudulent medical documents, real estate listings for stolen property, the systematic nature of elder abuse across 47 families. Sarah's emotional breakdown began during my testimony. 40 years I worked 3 jobs to give her everything she wanted, I told the court, and this is how she repaid me. Not just betrayal, but criminal conspiracy. Dad, please, Sarah sobbed. We owe so much money. Mike's business failed and we're about to lose everything. So you decided to steal mine? Mike finally exploded. You selfish old man. You're going to die soon anyway. Why shouldn't we benefit from your property? That's enough. Judge Davis's gavel echoed like a gunshot. But I wasn't finished. The moment had arrived for my ultimate surprise. Your Honor, I'd like to present one final piece of evidence. Thomas Green approached the bench with my will, properly authenticated and sealed. This document, dated August 15, 2024, represents Mr. Connor's last will and testament. Sarah looked up from her tears, confused. The will leaves Mr. Connor's entire estate to the Veterans Administration Medical Center. Sarah Connor Thornton is specifically excluded from any inheritance. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. What? That's impossible. Every crime you committed, I said quietly, was for property you would never inherit anyway. Mike's face turned purple with rage. You vindictive old bastard. Order in the court. Judge Davis reviewed the will documentation with the thoroughness of someone who'd spent decades weighing evidence. This court finds sufficient evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and document falsification. Guilty verdicts for all defendants. The gavel fell with the finality of thunder. Bailiff, arrest warrants for Sarah Connor Thornton and Michael Thornton. As the handcuffs clicked around my daughter's wrists, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The police officers led Sarah and Mike away in handcuffs. Their fraud scheme collapsed into criminal charges and certain imprisonment. Sarah's sobs echoed through the courthouse halls as reality crashed over her like a tsunami of consequence. "Justice has prevailed, friends," I announced to Mary, Frank, and Robert as we watched the squad car pull away. "John, you proved that age isn't the end," Mary said, her eyes bright with tears of satisfaction. "It's just the beginning of wisdom." The ride back to Sunset Haven felt like a victory parade. Eric Palmer had already been terminated and arrested, his criminal enterprise exposed to federal investigators. The facility's management scrambled to contain the scandal, while 47 families began receiving calls about their loved ones' situations. "Mr. Connor," the new administrator stammered as I collected my belongings, "we had no idea about Eric's activities. Please accept our sincere apologies." "Your apologies are noted," I replied coolly, and rejected. Loading my car felt like emerging from a cave into sunlight. Every personal item rescued from institutional storage represented reclaimed dignity. My toolbox, Dorothy's photographs, the Purple Heart I'd never discussed, all returning home where they belonged. Mary, Frank, and Robert stood beside my packed car, 4 people who'd found family in the most unlikely circumstances. "Thursday dinner's at my house," I announced, "starting this week. Dorothy always said a good meal shared with friends was the closest thing to heaven on earth." "We'll bring dessert," Mary promised. "And wine," Frank added with a grin. "And conversation," Robert concluded. "Lots of conversation." The drive home took me through neighborhoods I'd known for decades, streets where I'd watched Sarah grow up, corners where Dorothy and I had walked hand in hand. But instead of nostalgia, I felt anticipation. My house welcomed me back like an old friend. The kitchen where Sarah had betrayed me now seemed brighter, ready for new memories. The dining room where we'd shared so many family meals would host my chosen family, people who'd stood beside me when blood relations failed. Thursday evening arrived with the smell of pot roast and the sound of laughter. Mary brought her famous apple pie. Frank contributed a bottle of wine he'd been saving for something special. Robert arrived with legal updates about Sarah and Mike's plea negotiations. 18 months minimum, he reported over dinner. Eric's cooperation bought him a lighter sentence, but your daughter and her husband are facing the full weight of federal fraud charges. And the other families? 47 cases being reviewed, class action lawsuit proceeding. This scandal's going to reshape elder care regulations nationwide. We ate and talked and laughed until almost midnight. 4 people who'd found something precious in the ruins of family betrayal. Not blood relations, but something stronger. Chosen family forged in crisis and tempered by justice. Later, after my friends had gone home, I sat in my recliner looking at Dorothy's photograph. The woman who'd loved me for 22 years smiled back from the mantelpiece, surrounded by pictures of a daughter who'd chosen greed over love. "She made her choice, sweetheart," I whispered to the photo, "and I made mine." Outside, snow fell softly on the garden Dorothy had planted, covering the earth with clean white possibilities. Spring would come soon, bringing new growth, new beginnings, new chances for the family I'd chosen over the one that had chosen to betray me. Sarah had thrown away 40 years of love for money she would never receive. I'd gained something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that real family isn't determined by blood, but by who stands beside you when everything falls apart. The old man they'd tried to discard had not only survived, he'd triumphed, and the best was yet to come. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.